Okay, so we're recording. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are very fortunate to have with us tonight Catherine Petritis. She is an integrated nutritional coach, and she is going to cover some very good information on gluten sensitivity. After the presentation, we will be opening it up for questions. So Catherine, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody. Hello, John and Catherine. Thanks, Catherine. I'm so grateful to be a presenter for the South Huntington Library. I hope that I can enlighten the viewers tonight on a very confusing topic, gluten-free living, gluten-free sensitivity. We have some really good information, and I'm going to be breaking up the 1 hour into 4 different segments. The segments are: what is gluten? Where does it hide? When did the trouble start with gluten intolerance? And the story of wheat, which is really interesting. Okay, so gluten is a collective term for a really large group of proteins that naturally occur in wheat, barley, rye, and similar grains, as you can see in the picture. It's the glue that keeps breads, pastas, cookies, and cakes from falling apart. So it thickens food. Even in the most healthy of people, gluten does not get fully absorbed in the upper intestinal tract. I've had the opportunity to make seitan, which is a vegan pretend meat that people eat. And the way to make it is to just run flour under water in your hands until it forms like these threads, this glutinous threads that actually could be molded into a ball. So if you could visualize that, that's what gluten looks like. They're threads of the byproduct of the wheat. For people who are eating seitan, it's not my favorite food, and not everybody can digest it, but that could be another talk. So if you could visualize it, gluten is a binding factor. So this is important because a lot of people don't realize where gluten is hiding. Now, this is for somebody who's watching who is gluten intolerant or maybe thinks they could be gluten intolerant. It's in anything containing wheat, rye, and barley. Gluten is in bran, wheat protein. It's in cakes and cookies, breads and cereals, muffins, tarts, cornmeal breading, brown rice syrup, those bouillon cubes you may be using, candy and chewing gum, baked beans, canned soups, cheese spreads, chocolate, thickeners like malts and starches that are in so many things, maltodextrin, which people don't realize is a sugar coming from corn and could be a wheat, cream sauces, and even in flavored tofu. French fries, frostings, gravy in most sauces, ice cream and frozen yogurts, most condiments, pickles, salad dressings, sausage, cold cuts, hot dogs, soup stock, which we all buy, sushi rice, tea bags that are sealed with a wheat starch, chips and flavoring, veggie meat, the glue on envelopes even, and turkey if it's self-basting or even seasoned. So you can see how careful one needs to be if they think they could have a gluten sensitivity. There is a long history of the seeds of grasses. This is sort of a little story I'm going to be talking about. And to talk about gluten sensitivity again, it's also referred to as a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And it's the most common of all gluten related. So anybody watching or listening who's unsure if they have a serious gluten issue like celiac, we'll see later on in my talk how it's going to be made very clearly whether you're gluten sensitive or you could have, a chronic illness as celiac. So this is a long story, but I'm going to try to make it pretty quick. 2 million years ago, we did not eat grasses. We ate nuts and seeds and organs of animals and fish. That was more recent because hooks weren't discovered for fishing. And what caused humans to say, I'm going to start eating these grasses, like these people you see in the picture? All of a sudden, they started eating grasses. Well, this goes back almost a million years, and it refers to something called the Fertile Crescent, which was global warming. Humans actually ran out of these forms of food I mentioned before, and there was nothing to eat. And they knew they couldn't eat grass because humans cannot eat grass. You get nauseous, you would get sick if you just went out in your garden and ate grass. So they needed to develop a grass that people could eat. So here comes what they call the wheats of the Bible. The very first wheats. The Yukon wheat, and it's hard to understand actually if you're not a chemist, which I'm not, about the chromosomes, but these wheats all have chromosomes because they mate with each other. So the Yukon wheat was the original wheat going back 12,000 years ago. It's also called the wheat of the Bible, as well as the emmer wheat that you see in the picture. It has a golden color and it uses 80% of the grain. We are so lucky now that there's a product out on the market, and the company is called Jovial, Jovial, and it's an all-purpose unicorn wheat, which has 4 grams of protein. So this wheat, this ancient wheat that you see on the top middle of the screen, you can actually purchase right now. And I've been using it, and I want to tell you that it's a good feeling to buy an all-purpose wheat that has not been bleached out or bromated and has a lot of protein in it. So we can look at this screen and almost take a step back and see that this is available to us right now. And when you purchase that wheat, which you can get at Whole Foods or you can get on Amazon, Trader Joe's doesn't have it, Wild by Nature has it. So there are only certain health food stores that are carrying it, but I know it's on Amazon because I've purchased it on Amazon. And there's a whole story right on the package and an email and an internet that you can go to and learn more about these wheats. So we changed, but not by nature. Okay, so here's where wheat started to change. In the 1960s, in east of Mexico City, agricultural scientists were hibernating different strands of wheat. And they actually won a Nobel Peace Prize for this. Because we came to a point where there's so many millions of people and we're running out of food for them. So this had to happen. But welcoming the induction of chemicals was not really what Mother Nature assumed was going to happen. sodium azide, which is a toxic industrial compound, was introduced. And today it covers a million acres in the Pacific Northwest. So you could see that wheat was changed by humans. And this good scientist in the picture, he's just trying to increase food production until a company came in and said, let's hybridize the wheat and let's change the wheat so we can have more wheat. And the wheat would be resistant to chemicals and bugs and so forth. As so many of you know, that we have a problem with the genetic altering of wheat and other crops, mostly by Monsanto. So here, this company is Clearfield, and it's a company that dates back to the 1960s. And in order to make resistant bugs to all this wheat you see in the field, the farmers sprayed to kill the weeds with some pretty toxic industrial compounds. This to me is so sad. So here comes cancer and other diseases. Did you ever hear that your grandparents couldn't eat gluten? They could be gluten intolerant. Their stomachs hurt when they ate bread. No. And or even our parents, it was unheard of, gluten-free, gluten sensitivities. So gluten intolerances started, and they started here with new allergens that were formed from different strands of wheat. Lectin is one. I don't know if you've heard of lectins. They're also anti-nutrients. And somebody who has digestive issues can definitely not have them. And they're in so much of the wheat. So this is what happened. Some of the terms of these that you see on the screen provoke high insulin levels. So picture this, one piece of a store-bought whole wheat bread, not an artisan bread, not an organic bread, but a store-bought bread that you would buy in the supermarket. 2 pieces actually will raise your blood sugar levels because they have a higher amount than 2 tablespoons of sugar. So a simple wheat bread could raise your insulin and cause a lot of issues. But again, this isn't with a good organic artisan bread, which I'm going to explain further. Every organ system is affected by grains for chronic illnesses. And this is a response to the seeds of the grasses. Because when we go back to that picture of ancient people picking the grasses, they really didn't realize that the grasses had seeds. And it was the seeds of the grasses that us as humans could not digest. And some people to this day cannot digest them. So celiac disease, which is a gluten-related disorder, and anybody listening tonight who's very concerned about what's celiac, could I get celiac if I continue to eat wheat? Here's some good information. Celiac is an autoimmune disorder, and the immune system triggers an attack on the intestines when gluten is eaten. And if you're not sure and you don't know you have celiac, you'll be in terrible discomfort when you're eating wheat. And it affects 1% of the population of 3 million Americans. Doesn't seem like a lot, but it is. And there's 300 and more symptoms that have been reported. And we're going to take a look at that. And not to get too technical, I promise. So if you have a wheat allergy, which is in the second column here, you will have an allergic immune response, but it may not be as serious as the first column. You may have swelling, itchy eyes, hives. A lot of people say I get a rash when I eat wheat. I have problems breathing. And a gluten sensitivity, which is in the third column here, which is thank God, a non-autoimmune disorder. This can be diagnosed. And it's so many people are going through this now. And the symptoms mirror celiac disease, but they are not as serious. So in this picture, you could really see how somebody who's unsure about whether they have a gluten intolerance or not can see how gluten affects all these organ systems and systems in our body. And especially some people get depressed when they eat wheat and they don't even recognize that, till it gets to a point where they go to a doctor and say, there's something wrong with me and I can't pinpoint it. Here we talk about the rashes again, easy bruising, and of course, upper GI distress, chronic fatigue, hair loss. If you're experiencing any of these symptoms, you want to look further into, do you have a gluten intolerance? The autoimmune diseases and conditions that are associated, they're vast, as you could see on this sheet, the slide. I won't go through any of them, but fibromyalgia, people have heard about that. If you know of anybody who experienced that, Graves' diseases, Hashimoto disease, a disease of the thyroid, lupus, juvenile arthritis, skin disorders, psoriasis being one of them. All of these are affected by wheat. It's truly unbelievable. And you may not get this information just going to your regular doctor. Some symptoms that are very common if you've ingested wheat and you become very sick already, you can see on the screen, and nervous system symptoms. As we mentioned before, being depressed, anxiety, mood disorders, links now gluten intolerance to autism, bipolar, and other neurological issues. So just a little story about myself. And right now I'm going to be 70. And I have to say up to this point, I never experienced any gluten intolerances. But if I go to a restaurant and I eat the bread on the table, which I try not to, but sometimes we just have to, we're hungry. I notice the following day, I don't feel the same. I may have a little bit of that brain fog. And I'm just not me. And I've pinpointed it myself, which I call cheaper breads or supermarket breads, not a good artisan bread that somebody just made or that I could find online, or sourdough bread. So I find that that's started to happen to me. And we're going to look into that, and I'm going to explain and give you some answers for that. But by all means, keep a food journal. If you think any of these things could be happening to you, it's very wise to have when you go to your internist, your regular doctor, or if you're seeing a functional medicine doctor. It's very important to have everything written down. So by all means, keep a food journal, and that's not hard to do. So right now, who is eating gluten-free? Why are we even having this lecture tonight? Well, celiac disease, which is a very serious chronic illness affected by gluten, that's, a part of the population, and it is a chronic illness. Non-gluten sensitivity, which I'm talking about, is 6% of the population, and that unfortunately is growing. And other gluten-related disorders, less than 1%, and that's going up too. Health concerns and additional disorders, and gluten-free lifestyle, 23% of the population. It's good to know that there is diagnostic testing for this, and we're going to look into what those pillars are. And at the bottom of this screen is an excellent website. Take your phone out and just take a picture of it if you're interested in it to get some really good information. www.celiaccentral.org. So this always saddens me because the gluten spectrum happens for children. And it could be seen in delayed speech, failure to thrive, delayed growth and short stature, delayed puberty, dental abnormalities, concentration problems, and just irritability and behavioral changes. And would a parent think maybe this is autism and it's really not? It's gluten sensitivity. Here's when the right doctor can help a family with this. So there definitely is a celiac boom going on. And buyer beware on these products. It is a $5 billion sales market in gluten-free. And the annual growth rate of 30% every year. Watch the integrities of these products, I say. Always read the labels. In this picture, there's some high-risk items. In 2014, the US passed a gluten-free label. But it's changed up to today. And prior to that, anyone could produce a label. So here's an example of watching out and reading labels. I met a friend in Wild by Nature the other night, and I know she's gluten-free, and I asked her to direct me to the gluten-free bread that she buys, and they're in the freezer. So I went over to the bread. She said it was wonderful. She does really great on it. I went over and I looked at the bread. I didn't even take a picture of it because I was afraid if she saw me, she would say, "What are you doing?" So I just made a mental note of it. And her bread, which was a chia and millet bread, gluten-free, had 2 different sugars in it, and they were up high on the list. It had guar gum in it, which is a binder, which could actually harm and hurt the intestines if you're eating a lot of it. It had cornstarch, rice flour, potato flour, and tapioca starch. If you're not diagnosed with gluten intolerance and you eat this bread thinking that you are, this could really hurt your stomach. I chose a bread that was in the freezer of that section, which is an old-fashioned sourdough spelt bread from a company called Berlin Baker, Berlin. And they only had 3 ingredients as opposed to her bread that had like 10. And no added gluten. And it was simply a spelt bread with some wheat, water, and sea salt. And to be a sourdough bread, which is really good for gut flora, it does have a sourdough starter, but that doesn't have to be on the label. So I'm saying to you, buyer beware, and definitely be your own detective if you're reaching out for one of these gluten-free products. So let's take a look at some of them. These gluten-free products are okay. But I have a check mark on rice bran and tapioca and potato starch, which I mentioned those things were in the bread that she was looking at. These are not items that I think that you want to have in your bread, and they could hurt or irritate the intestines. So there's so many more choices. Amaranth, chickpea flours are excellent. Buckwheat flours are great. Corn, coconut flour is great. I just made a dessert with it the other day. I love it. I love the almond flour. And nut and seed flours are great. We're just going to go back one slide. Gluten-free, definitely to avoid, if you're diagnosed with gluten-free or gluten-free sensitivity, these are definitely items that you, compounds and items that you definitely want to avoid, like the malt extract we see up there. Here's the seitan that I talked about, which is a wheat gluten, it's a pretend meat. If you think you don't want to eat meat, you're going to eat seitan. You're doing yourself a lot of harm, but it is a very popular item. We mentioned the Ucorn, over here, the Ucorn, a flour, which I said is wonderful and it's available now. But for somebody who is diagnosed with gluten sensitivity, gluten intolerance, they cannot eat these wheats, unfortunately. But we looked at some on the previous slide, and there's a lot that can be offered. And look at all the gluten-free choices. This makes me really happy for anybody who's watching or listening that says, woe is me, what am I going to do now? There's so many wonderful fruits and vegetables. There's plant-based proteins, which could be your main meal, beans, nuts, and seeds. Lean meats, fish and poultry, and please, antibiotic-free, hormone-free choices there. Dairy, when tolerated, let your dairy be grass-fed, grass-finished, and gluten-free whole grains, which are available in the market, like oats, gluten-free oats. And what a beautiful array of flours I'm seeing here that come from seeds. Flours that can come from quinoa flour is available, millet flour, amaranth flour, and the whole grains. We talk about quinoa a lot. It's a super grain, also called the mother grain, has essential fatty acids in it, has 20 of the essential 22 amino acids that our body needs. Make a pot every week. It's my favorite grain. Brown rice, there's your gluten-free oats, some nut flours, almond flour is incredible. You can just drench your chicken cutlet in it or your fish if you're going to saute it. It makes great cookies. You could put it in so many things that you're making. Millet is so sweet and tasty. And here's buckwheat again, which is wonderful. If you're using corn, please get non-genetically modified corn. So it must be organic corn. So anybody out there who's watching and says, I have to make the change now. I have to be gluten-free, or I'm going to go on an elimination diet, which is a very important step. If you're not sure if you're allergic to gluten, you may want to spend 3 weeks on an elimination of gluten, and that's called an elimination diet, and it's very effective and it works for so many people. So if you're stopping eating grains, you have to make a very smooth transition, because there will be at least a 1 week withdrawal to cut out all flours and grains. And here's what you need to do. Take a minute, if anybody who's watching this and would like to take a picture on this slide. You need to hydrate. Sea salt is very important. Magnesium supplement is very important. Probiotics is very important. Iodine, vitamin D is extremely important. And always omega-3 fatty acids, iron, and zinc. And you even have to think about preventing cross-contamination when you're eating out. It's hard to believe, but this is really important if you're extremely sensitive to gluten or you've been diagnosed with celiac. And there's a nice label there, G-free, which you may see on some restaurant menus. And choose restaurants that have the GF community. And you could call or go on their websites. Always call ahead to find out what your options are in advance. And just take a look at the menu online. That's so easy to do. And communicate to the wait staff too, very graciously when you're there. And if anything happens, you could always file a complaint and spread the word when you have visited a restaurant that you're happy with too. Share that with other people. And this looks funny, but it's really not. And this is me. Even if I just leave the house, I always have like a little cooler with me. So I never have to make a quick decision on something to eat if I'm starving. But for people who are gluten-free, you can research ahead of time gluten-free friendly hotels and resources. You can contact the hotel chef. You can make reservations way in advance. And you could reserve a room with a mini fridge. And here you have your cooler, and you're bringing a lot of things, in it with you. And you could ship in advance. I know that sounds really drama, but for people who need to, it's really a wonderful alternative for them. So carry along an abundance of gluten-free options. And for everyone, invest in a really nice portable cooler. It could be smaller than this. And I always say, put your nuts and seeds, your drinks, maybe a good quality yogurt, probiotic yogurt, and of course your waters. So preventing cross-contamination when shopping, I love to say again, be your own detective. You have to read everything. You have to ask questions. You could call ahead of time and speak and see if the supermarket or health food store has their own dietitian. Some do, but definitely do your homework. And there's a lot of options now, as we just saw. You can search for gluten-free recipes, and definitely use caution when purchasing deli items, prepared foods. Bulk foods are what we call other high-risk items. Be your own detective. Trader Joe's is great about having at least 4 lists of gluten-free products. When you go into the store, you have to go up to the customer service desk, but they're extremely accommodating. And there's all these gluten-free resources. There's guides, there's apps, restaurant grocery guides, restaurant cards, and gluten-free travel sites. The glutenfree travelsite.com, which is on this slide if you want to take a picture. And ask your local support group too, to give lists if you belong to a support group. And I want you to be very proactive. I say make your own baked goods. Why buy gluten-free products? It's so easy to make something with coconut flour and almond flour and quality eggs. A lot of the keto recipes out there have them. And we're just so blessed with the World Wide Web that at our fingertips, we can get wonderful ideas. In your handout that I provided the library with, there will be some gluten-free ideas on that also. And thanks on my references tonight to some wonderful teachers. William Davis is the author of an incredible called Wheat Belly. And the information on the ancient grains, which I think are fascinating, they're from his book. You can look him up or you can Google him, and you can get a lot of information on those biblical wheats and the story of how we didn't always eat wheat, but then we started eating wheat and a lot of problems started. And again, that was just to feed the millions of people that are starving, and the numbers is still going up. So here is my information. I am always available to everybody who's part of the library. If you want to talk to me personally, or if I could send anything further or enlighten you further, I'm very happy with the handouts tonight. And the things that we have, the gluten-free resources, there's a few pages of that if you didn't take a picture of one of them. And for those who are really in doubt, there's a lot of diagnostic tests now that you can take. Don't be worried, there's so much more information than ever out there. And Catherine has recorded in case you have a family member or somebody who needs this information. So I think we're going to go back now to our evening and answer questions.
Yes, if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the chat. While you're getting your thoughts together, I wanted to let you know that the handouts and recipes that Catherine referred to are on our event calendar. If you go to April 26th and click on this event, you'll see that the PDFs are attached and you can download them or just look at them online, whatever you like. So anybody have any questions for Catherine?
And I just want to say to everybody, and thank you for joining, is that, as I said, at this point in my life, I'm feeling a little irritable from, I call it cheap gluten. I'm sorry, I don't want to insult anybody, but like the bread on the table when you go to a restaurant. But when you eat a good artisan bread, or you go to a local bakery and you purchase an artisan bread with like 3 ingredients, this usually doesn't happen. And I have a friend who traveled to Italy and she was seriously gluten intolerant and she was able to eat the pasta. And why is that? And the reason for this that I didn't mention is because with modern technology now, they don't even need bread. The bread is mass produced on a conveyor belt, and it's usually injected with more, as they call it, vital gluten to speed up the process so they can make bread faster. Nobody is kneading it and taking the time for it to rise. Like if you want to make a beautiful bread at home, you probably won't be affected by it. It's called making an artisan bread. So again, it's some of the cheaper breads, the supermarket breads. So again, buyer beware and know your breads. But you can still enjoy some good pasta, some good breads, and there are excellent pastas. I enjoy myself brown rice and quinoa pasta that I get at Trader Joe's. I really don't eat all-purpose flour pasta, white pasta. If I eat pasta, it's usually like a quinoa or a chickpea. And I'm happier with that. And of course, I'm a big fan of soba noodles, which is a buckwheat pasta. Okay, sorry, I had to check that.
Okay, we have a question in the chat from John. Do you have any info about CSID? I know what that is.
It's not, CSID is not in my info tonight, but please send me an email. You have my information and I will get it to you. And that is a pretty serious illness that, you know, could be deadly. It's a real, it's almost like being septic for the bloodstream. So definitely contact me and I can get you some information. John, did that answer your question?
Yeah, or does anyone else have a question? You can unmute or type in the chat, which is at the bottom of on your toolbar. John said thank you. I think you must have answered his question.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Anybody have some stories about eating that cheap bread I spoke about, or gluten-free bread? Or any breads out there, maybe you purchase some gluten-free products and your stomach doesn't feel right for them. So a lot of them are, you know, the gargums and the tapioca and potato starch. And
Okay, well, I guess we don't have any further questions. Again, I'd like to refer to you to our event calendar. Go to this event on our event calendar and you can access those handouts. And there's a couple of recipes on there too. You want to say what the recipes are?
well, I like to cover everything. I think I have a soup and I have a baked good and protein, you know, items that you can have gluten-free and can be your main meal.
Okay, so we have a thank you very much. Very informative from John and Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
Good luck, everybody. And thank you for joining.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Catherine, for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you, Catherine.